In this video, we're going to talk about the graphs of sine and cosine. So we've done a lot with sine and cosine. We've done SOHCAHTOA using right triangles. We've done all this unit circle stuff to figure out what the values of sine and cosine are at specific angles. But we haven't talked about the graphs yet. All right, so let's look at the graph of sine of x. All right, we're going to graph them on axes that look a little bit different than our normal ones that are just a bunch of boxes. And we'll kind of see why, because there's not as many important points on sine and cosine, but there are specific ones that we want to get exactly right. All right, so the first question is the sine graph. All right, our sine function, what's the biggest value you can ever get out of sine? All right, well, sine is the y values on this unit circle. So the biggest value you're going to get out is at the top of the circle, 1. And the smallest value you're going to get out is at the bottom of the circle, -1. So the sine graph is pretty nice that the highest value I care about is just at 1, and the lowest value I care about is at -1. Now the next thing is you'll see I kind of have these like 4 tick marks here. All right, what's happening with sine? So I start at sine at 0, and as I go along my unit circle, I'm kind of turning. I go up to 1, that peak. Then from there, I'm going to start going down to here, and I keep going down, and I turn back, and I keep going up back to here. All right, so my y values go up, back down, back up. All right, but kind of in a quadrant, the same type of things happen. I'm always going up here, always going down here. All right, so I'm actually going to separate my graph into the different quadrants because we talked about quadrants a lot and how they're important. So my first kind of important x value is actually going to be pi over 2. And then my next important x value is actually going to be pi. And then this cut off at 3 pi over 2. And then around, it's not on there, but that's 2 pi. So I'm just going to think about what's happening in my quadrants. All right, so in my first quadrant, I know all of my sine values are positive, and they're getting bigger until I hit the point pi over 2, 1. All right, so my x values are getting bigger until I get to that top of my unit circle. Then as I go through my second quadrant, as my angles are getting bigger, my y values are getting smaller. They're still positive, but they're getting smaller until I get down here at pi 0. So now my y values are going to get smaller, like that. Now what happens in quadrant 3, my y values are now negative, and they're going to keep going down until I get to that extreme value at 3 pi over 2, -1. So they're going to keep going down, until I hit that point. And at 2 pi, I'm back at 0, and my y values kind of increase until I hit that value. All right, so this is my basic graph of sine. And then what happens after this? Well, then I just am starting at the circle again, I go around. So then I'll have another increase, another decrease, another decrease, another increase. And we'll just kind of keep doing this forever. All right, and same thing going left. If I reverse this, it's going to go backwards like that. All right, but this is the important sine function, or part of our sine graph, just in this little section. All right, next we have cosine. We can ask the same question. What's the biggest cosines ever going to be? Well, cosine is the x values on the circle. So the biggest it'll be is over here at 1. The smallest it'll be is if I go all the way to the left at -1. So we actually run into the same situation as with sine. The biggest cosine will ever be is 1. The smallest it is -1. Again, the quadrants are important, so we'll use those as our kind of markers. And let's put on the nice point. So when I put in 0 into cosine, I get out 1. So that's a nice point I know on cosine. When I put in pi over 2, I get out 0. That's a nice point I know. When I put in pi, I get out -1. And the reason I'm just using these values, because these are all like decimals, I'm not exactly sure where they're going to be. But these values, I know exactly where -1 is going to be, or sorry, 0 is going to be for my x value, and exactly where 1 is going to be for that. And you can kind of see the general thing that's happening with cosine and these markers. The only common mistake students will make is just kind of drawing a V here, but the curve down, because it's a circle, it's kind of curved, curved up to this point, curved up to this point. And just like we said with sine, once I get here, I've basically gone around the circle, and I'm just going to do it again. So I'm going to have the exact same thing happen again. I'd have this part that goes down, this part that goes down and back up, this part that goes up, and it would just keep going forever. All right, so these are called waves, the sine and cosine waves, because you can see they just go up and down forever. So cosine looked like that for what we drew, but it just keeps repeating it because it just keeps going around the circle over and over again. So cosine is going to look like this over and over again, all the way to the left and right. All right, so let's quickly graph sine without the unit circle. So the way I do it is I know top value is 1, bottom value is -1. Sine of 0, pi over 2. I'm just using the quadrants. All right, there's values on the quadrants. Sine of 0, if I looked at my unit circle, is 0. Sine of pi over 2 is 1. Sine of pi is 0. 3 pi over 2 is -1. 2 pi is 0. All right, so I'm just kind of thinking about the unit circle, what these values are, and then I know it's a wave that's just going to connect all these points. I missed that point, but close enough. All right, so that's the graph of sine. Cosine, same thing. I know the biggest value is 1. The smallest value is -1. I'm going to break it up into my quadrants, which are just the fractions of pi. If I look at my unit circle, cosine starts at 1. At the top, it's 0. At the left, it's -1. At the bottom, it's 0. At the right, it's 1. And I connect them with the wave. And that's my graph of cosine. All right, so if you looked at these at the same time, let's put sine on the same graph as cosine. Let's do it in yellow. It would look like this. All right, so they look really similar. They're both just waves that go through things. So how can I tell one from the other? I just remember what happens at 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. Sine of 0 is 0. All right, and you can get this from the unit circle. So I know this green one has to be cosine because it starts at 1. And this yellow one that starts at 0 has to be sine. Right, so that's how I can tell them apart. All right, but they're just these waves that go up and down. All right, and the marks on the x-axis represent the quadrants to kind of help me differentiate what's happening in each quadrant of sine and cosine. But for this lesson, I just want to know the basic graphs of sine and cosine.